Let's talk rankings next on Fantasy Baseball Today in 5. Welcome to FBT in 5. I'm Chris Towers here with Chris Welsh, and we've got fantasy baseball rankings available on CBSSports.com from Scott White, Frank Stamfel, and myself. You can go check those out, CBSSports.com/fantasy/baseball, to see our full rankings for the first time for the 2023 season. And Chris and I are going to talk about the top 5, maybe top 6-ish hitters and some of the top pitchers on the board for 2023. Chris, we'll start with the fact that Scott, Frank, and I all have a different number one player in our Roto leagues. Scott has Aaron Judge. Frank has Jose Ramirez. I go with Ronald Acuna. It's not really like anybody dislikes any of those players. I think there's kind of a consensus top 5-ish players. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But Chris, who do you have number one overall?
Yeah, I am with you, Mr. Chris Towers. I've got Ronald Acuna at number 1. I'm with Frank at number 2, and then we can go through the rest if we want. But yeah, Ronald Acuna is my top guy. I think it's hard to go wrong here. You got big, huge league-winning power in Aaron Judge. Jose Ramirez is probably the perfect mixture of volatility and floor, maybe of any of the guys you could take. NFBC drafts have Trey Turner at number 1, and I go Ronald Acuna. Just simply, I think the way he was able to adjust off of making elite stolen bases become primary in his game when he was losing power. He was top 15 in expected home run additions from last year. So I think the power can come back. It's a great offense. He showed the elite steals in under 120 games. He was able to be that impactful. And he's just, a year removed from the injury. So I think Ronald Acuna on a healthy season would be number 1, most likely. And I think the same thing would have been said on a guy like Fernando Tatis Jr. had he played last year and not be suspended. It's another guy that would be number 1. So I think the tier is very close, and I'm not shocked to see differences across the board from all three of you.
Yeah, I mean, the way I've got it ranked, my top 5, I think the top 5 is clear. They separate themselves. It's Ronald Acuna, Aaron Judge, Jose Ramirez, Julio Rodriguez, and Trey Turner. And you could do that in any order you want. Like, that's the order I have right now today because I have to have them in some kind of order. But if I didn't have to, it would just be Ronald Acuna 1, and then Aaron Judge, Jose Ramirez, Julio Rodriguez, and Trey Turner at number 2, because that's the way I've got it for my salary cap auction values. $44 Ronald Acuna. Everyone else is 43. There's very little difference. One thing that's really interesting to me, though, when looking at everyone's rankings here is Scott actually jumps Mookie Betts into his top 5. Frank and I are in agreement on the top 5 overall, but Scott moves Ronald Acuna down to 6 and has Mookie Betts at number 4. How do you feel about Mookie Betts?
Yeah, I think it's immensely fascinating. And I brought this up on the full show that people can check out on Fantasy Baseball Today, where it's like, you want to take a debate between a couple players. Mookie Betts and Kyle Tucker looks like this ultimate fascinating debate where Tucker has maybe the advantage on where the stolen bases have gone with good power and decent counting stats. Mookie Betts, even though the batting average has been down, batting average seems safer, became an elite home run guy. Stolen bases have knocked a little bit. You do lose a little bit. I think the loss of Trey Turner at 3 when Mookie Betts was a primary leadoff guy might bring those like awesome 117 runs down quite a bit. But Mookie Betts is safe. And Mookie Betts might also play some second base, which that is something you do have to reckon with if Dave Roberts is being truthful across the board. I have been increasingly moving Mookie Betts up. I don't have him in the top 5. You have him at 6. I don't have him at 6 either, but it's increasingly going that direction. And if we see any commitment to that second base stuff in spring training, and they're really considering it and not just handing it over to Miguel Vargas and Gavin Lux and, hey guys, have fun, that's just another added value that we really do have to consider. I think it's a pretty safe option. 30-10, probably in the 90s across the board. And if the batting average comes up, he's a very, very safe top 12 option overall, but just not top 5 for me.
All right. The other interesting thing as we move along to starting pitcher, you go to number 1 overall, and Frank and I are in agreement it's Garrett Cole. Scott's got Justin Verlander as his number 1 starting pitcher. Garrett Cole number 5. I think that's really interesting. Although there are some warts with Garrett Cole in terms of his ERA, especially when you look at the elite guys versus Garrett Cole. He's elite everywhere. The ERA's been a little inflated, so I think that's reasonable. But Justin Verlander at number 1, that's fascinating. Where do you have him ranked?
Yeah, I agree that it's fascinating. I've got him at number 7, so I'm a little bit off here. This is, though I am higher, we're all higher than the current NFBC numbers out there. Strikeouts drops. Yeah, it is 100%. We want the young hot guys that are going to put up big stats on the volatility and stuff like that. But he's outside the top 10 in SPs on NFBC. But I think you got to consider like the team change context of going to the Mets. That's a pretty big alteration, pretty big city. Strikeouts were down. He had over a 1.5 differential between ERA and xFIP, something to consider maybe a little bit. I think he's a great pitcher. I think he is easy to talk about in the top 10. As the equivocal number 1 overall, I'm not quite there because it just lacks the elite strikeout upside right now, as that's tapering down. But he's going to get wins. He's going to go deep into games. He's a great option. Just a little bit more in your guys' camp.
Yeah, the question for me will be, one, can he get the strikeouts back up to like 10 per 9? I think that's possible, but the swinging strike rate also did move in the opposite direction from what you want last season. And then does the volume come back? He was only like 175 innings last season. If he can be a 195 inning guy with 9.5 K per 9 and the elite ratios that you know you're going to get from him, that does change the calculus a little bit. And I think it's interesting to make that bet, but it's not one that I'm necessarily making, although he's SP3 for me. So it's not like I dislike Justin Verlander by any means. So that's going to do it for FBT and 5. We'll be back tomorrow to talk some first-year player draft rankings. We'll see you then.